Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast. Get ready for some Rockets conversation with my guest today from Red Nation Hoops, Salman Ali. Great to have you, Salman. You guys know him from his podcast. Of course, it's been on for years on Twitter at Salman Ali NBA. And Salman, I've always been amazed with your just fantastic array of guests. Just heard the one with Rafael Barlow, and that was fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Rafael was great. I really enjoy having him on.
Yeah, I'm a regular listener to his stuff, and he's always got some nice objective opinions about Rockets basketball, which is sometimes it feels like it's a bit hard, Salman, to find the objective opinions around the national NBA conversation.
Yeah, the Rockets get people charged up one way or the other. People seem to have a tough time being neutral on them.
Yeah, I feel like that because the Rocket fan base is such a big fan base on social media that
But it wasn't always that way, though. This is a fairly new phenomenon. Like, I've noticed that. Like, when I first got into this space, whatever, 9 or 10 years ago, Rockets Twitter was like 10 people. Right, it was like the people you would think, right? Like Jonathan Fagan, Clutch fans, very small amount of people. Mark Berman, I guess you could count, right? And then slowly over time, it's built up to this juggernaut, and now people just despise them. So it's truly been amazing to watch.
Yeah, I guess my point is, I think because there is such a big social media presence with the Rockets, because they're popular, of course, in China and Turkey now, and they bring a lot of that fan base. I feel like the national guys are trolling that fan base. And I think a lot of that stuff, how do you get people to quote tweet or quote actually and put links up to what you're doing is you do what Bill Simmons does. It just seems like, just accidentally a couple minutes each show, he just takes a shot at the Rockets and everybody, all of a sudden they're putting up Bill Simmons links. And I think the Rockets fans need to stop falling for the troll job that some of these guys are doing.
It's been kind of bizarre to watch the Rockets get so much attention during a time of rebuilding. That's abnormal. Like, rebuilding teams generally don't get airtime on big national platforms on any sort of regular basis. This is a very interesting thing to watch. I don't know why that's happening. It seems like there are a lot of people that believe the Rockets are a cesspool of some sorts. I don't necessarily sure. I'm not necessarily sure if I buy that, but it's been interesting to watch for sure. I don't know if I can remember a team off the top. Maybe the Trust the Process Sixers. That had a lot of airtime for a rebuilding NBA team. Other than that, rebuilding teams, everybody just ignores them until it's time.
Well, the Rockets weren't that popular amongst the national guys because everybody hated the way James Harden played basketball. James Harden has never been a popular guy amongst the national people. Then James Harden leaves and everybody's like, well, we hate Tillman because he's a national figure that, he comes on shows and says outlandish stuff. So we don't necessarily like him. And then the Rockets go into kind of this process like rebuild, which people don't always like process like rebuild. So I think there's a lot of things into play, but I still feel like it's the trolling a little bit. That's what they're trying to do at times. So I don't know.
Maybe. I mean, listen, it definitely does generate clicks from the Rockets fans, right? They're definitely going to click on it. Yeah.
Something that's been on my mind now that Summer League is over is this Rockets rotation. And I want to get into that with you shortly. But first, I made a bold proclamation last week, Salman, and I want to get your reaction. Among the guys on this roster, all the young guys, I believe Amen Thompson, not Jalen, not Şengün, not Jabari, will be the best Rocket player in the next 5 years. Do you agree?
That's been out there in the ether, definitely in hushed tones, because it is definitely the I wouldn't say like the least popular opinion. It's just people are going to go to Jalen, people are going to go to Şengün, people are going to go to Jabari first. But I understand the argument. I mean, physically he's a freak, right? Probably already one of the best athletes in the NBA. Just in the way he, his first step is just as quick as Jalen's. He is great at contorting his body. High level finisher, like really, really high level finisher. And the passing is instinctual, which I always think for like offensive superstars is like kind of a necessity. Not a necessity, but it's much harder to learn that. And when you have it instinctually, it's much easier to build like an offense around you if you just have that natural passing feel. Like Harden had it, LeBron had it, Magic had it, Luka has it, right? Like Giannis has it. Like when you have that feel right away coming into the NBA, and you have that ability to get to the basket whenever the hell you want, it's always encouraging. It's always a good start. I don't think that's a hot take. No, I think that's a perfectly respectable opinion.
Yeah. How do you build the best Rockets player before this year? You take Jalen Green's athleticism, and then you take Şengün above the neck, and that's what he looks like. And I feel like elite skills, elite things make great players in the NBA. And he's got two potential elite skills, passing and defense. And I don't know what other Rocket that I'm really convinced have two elite skills, whether it's rebounding or scoring or whatever you want to say.
I would think that Şengün and Jalen do have some elite skills. Like I think the ability to get to the basket whenever you want, I think is an elite skill, right?
Two. I'm saying, give me more than one on one of the Rockets players that you think, okay, that's got the potential to be two. Şengün's passing for sure.
His scoring ability too. I mean he is definitely someone who can score like points per possession. I mean, right now he is the points per possession leader on the roster. Like he's just crazy efficient at scoring the basketball. Gets the free throw line, so that helps his efficiency too. I'm not disagreeing with you. I think he does have a hurdle with the shooting, right? Like that is something he's gonna have to get over. Şengün has a hurdle with the defense. Jalen has a hurdle with the defense and the passing, right? Like everybody's gonna have their hurdles, but the shooting with Amen, it's listen, he's starting from a really rough base point, and he's 20 years old. And that's important to note coming in, because it's much better if you're like a project shooter at 18 coming into the NBA versus when you're 20, you're coming into the NBA. You have less run time to get to where you need to be respectable. So listen, it's going to be interesting to see what he can develop when teams eventually wall off the paint and when teams close out shooters. You know, what's his counter going to be? Is that going to be a floater? Is that going to be a mid-range jumper? Can he eventually develop a three-point shot? I don't know, but that's why we pay attention to the rebuild. That's why you and I do this, right? We want to know. We're trying to guess. We're trying to figure out how, these guys develop these unique skills.
Yeah, and of course, I just have such confidence that this guy's going to put the work in, and shooting more than any other skill is just it's putting that work in over and over and over again. And it reminds me, I've said this before, of Jason Kidd. When he came into the NBA, it was bad. It looked ugly. It looked real ugly, probably uglier than what I see from Amen shot, to be honest with you. I don't know if you remember Jason Kidd when he first started, but it was bad. And he put the work in, and over time, he made it happen. He became a good shooter.
But it is an anomalous story, right? Like Jason Kidd is like the story that people point to. It's like Jason Kidd and Kawhi, right? Like those are the two stories that people point to in terms of like shooting was a weakness, became an unbelievable strength. Jason Kidd's one of the top, I think he still holds the top 10 three-pointers made. I'm not sure. It's a lot of players have been passing him up. I know Harden passed him up recently. I know Steph passed him up, but he was at one point among the top 10 in three-pointers made. Kawhi Leonard is an elite three-point shooter. So like getting from that to that, it's definitely something that's hard, but it's easier when you're not having to be that guy right away, when you can kind of develop these skills in the background, right? When Kawhi Leonard wasn't the focal point for the Spurs offense for like the first 6 years of his career, he had the freedom to kind of play around in the background and have the development staff work with him. And the Spurs were willing to wait, because it's not like this guy was going to be a heavy usage guy. If Amen's going to come in first year in the NBA, be a bench guy, come off the bench for Fred VanVleet, be kind of a secondary creator as opposed to a primary creator. Maybe he creates off the second unit primary sometimes. But if that's going to be the plan with him, maybe it's easier to develop those skills. I don't know. It's going to be tough. It's even going to be tougher for his brother Asor, because he's going to be like the tertiary ball handler. Like there are a lot of ball handlers in Detroit that he's going to be fighting with. These twins have kind of an interesting roadmap to relevance. But I think they're going to be pretty good NBA players. I really like them a lot.
Yeah, it's easier to not be a good shooter when you got the ball in your hands and you're depending on everybody else to make shots once they get open and you deliver them the ball. So yeah, I definitely agree with you. What did you learn about Cam Whitmore in Summer League? I mean, nothing, Salman, surprised me about Cam from the neck down, the athleticism, all that sort of stuff. What caught your eye from the neck up when you watched him?
His defensive instincts. Like he is a high level. I mean, the motor is ridiculous, right? And that helps. And the athletic tools that help. But really his feel, he has a knack for getting the ball. And that is something you can't teach. That is just something that you have. He has a knack for blocking, right? Like, again, not something you can teach. That's just something that you have or you don't. When you talk to analytics people, you hear, I mean, I'm sure you've heard the term stocks before, right? Like blocks and steals combined, stocks.
Sure.
That's a legitimate stat that, analytics people used to use to project good defenders in the NBA. And with Whitmore, that is something that is I mean, he had stocks up and down Summer League. He had that one game with 8 steals. I think that, to me, especially because of, we talk about rough roadmap for maybe Amen Thompson being kind of in the background. Cam is going to be even somehow more in the background. Probably not going to play at all his first season. The fact that he has these ancillary skills, these instincts for getting the basketball, for defending, for being a high level motor guy, that's encouraging because that means there's a roadmap for him being kind of a complementary player, at least at first.
Remember when Jalen Green came into the NBA and the Rockets? How do you compare the two of them and their ability to see what's going on as they're driving to the basket and find the guy? Because that's the complaint right now is they get tunnel vision. They don't see where to go with the basketball once they make that drive and guys start to converge on him. How do you compare him and Jalen from that first year a couple of years ago?
So Jalen was a little bit ahead of where he's at right now. To his credit, Jalen was hyper aware of his playmaking criticisms, right? Like he spoke about it in interviews, and I saw the jump from him, the G League Ignite, to the rookie season, to the second year, like him just getting better as a passer every year, him getting, starting with the basic dump off reads his rookie season to kick out passes his second year, right? And now he's starting to make even more difficult reads. So we'll see what he has in store his third season in the NBA. He still has a lot of room to grow as a pick and roll ball handler, but I think he was a little bit ahead of where Whitmore was. Whitmore was just not. I mean, he got Jaylen Brown a lot as a comparison, and there's a reason for that. He is not someone who was very. The best way to put it, when he decided he was going to try and score, there was no changing that. Like, there's no changing. He's going to go and try and score. When Jalen goes and tries to score, if he sees something develop in the background, he has a feel to go and at least dump off pass, at least kick out pass, right? Like, those are good rudimentary passes to start with. I don't ever see Cam getting to a point where he can average 6 or 7 assists per game. I don't see that path for him. Can I see him get to a point where he's averaging 4, maybe 5, maybe? I can see that with Jalen Green. I can see 6, 7, 7.5 assists per game. I can see that in his future. I'm not sure if I can see that with Cam, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a bad player. Cam has things that Jalen doesn't have: the physical tools, the defensive ability. I think he has, especially off-ball awareness, ahead of where Jalen is. So, like, there's stuff that Jalen does not have that Cam doesn't have, that Cam has in spades. So, like, they're different players, but yeah, you're right in that that passing is not necessarily a strength of theirs. I think Jalen's still just a touch ahead.
Yeah, it's hard to tell with Summer League guys playing defense on you. And, the defense I thought in Summer League was much better than it typically is this year. But you mentioned Jaylen Brown comparison, Jalen Green comparison. It appeared as though Cam's got a better handle than those two guys. I mean, it's not a high bar with Jaylen Brown, but Jalen Green and him, I feel like he's got a little bit better handle coming into the league.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, that's certainly, like, Jaylen Brown was someone who defied a lot of projection models, right? Like, he was very much an Ainge pick, right? Ainge bet on this kid, and it worked out. It was risky in the moment. I'm not sure people remember at that time. Like, he was not like the consensus pick where the Celtics took him. it turned out to be right. With Cam, I mean, the Rockets took him at 20, right? Like they could have taken him 10 spots up and it still would have been a home run selection. There are different expectations here that we have to weigh here, and different roles. Jalen had, he came into a Celtics roster where he was starting his second season in the NBA. He was sixth man, seventh man his first year, starting second year, right? I don't know if that's going to happen with Cam Whitmore. I think Cam Whitmore may not play his first season. Second season might be like an eighth guy, might be a ninth guy. Depends on how the roster shakes up, the trade deadline, the offseason. We'll see what Rafael Stone decides to do, but he's going to be more of a project, and that's fine because he's 19 years old.
You talk about his minutes, and that's the next thing that I wanted to talk about in general is how do you see this rotation playing out for the Rockets? And let's assume the starters, unless you think differently, Van Vliet, Jalen, Brooks, Jabari, and Şengün. What do you do if you're Ime Udoka? What's going to happen with these guys off the bench? Who comes off the bench at what position? Maybe how many minutes do you see them getting? Like, how do you see this playing out?
If we're assuming meritocracy, right, which is best players get the most minutes, right? I think that you're pretty close to what the starting lineup is going to be. We'll see. We'll see what eventually happens in training camp to see if anybody actually outshines those five starters. But I think that's a reasonable bet on the starting lineup. Sixth, seventh man, I would say KPJ is an obvious one. First guy off the bench candidate. That's where I would have my money. I think Tari Eason is a good bet to be one of the first seven guys in the lineup every night. I would also put Jae'Sean Tate as a candidate. That's gonna, this guy didn't play last year, but I mean, he was his rookie year. I don't think people remember how good he was defensively. I thought he was an all NBA level defender right away coming into the NBA. The reason he wasn't an all NBA defender is because he was on the Houston Rockets, who were like one of the worst defenses in the NBA. It was hard to justify giving him as many votes as maybe he warranted. He was awesome. So, and I think Ime Udoka is really going to latch onto him. After that, backing up Şengün, I think you're going to be talking about probably Londale. Maybe he goes green. Udoka, I suspect it's going to be Londale though, and that's probably going to be your 8. And it's going to be interesting to see like who sneaks in there as your 9th and 10th guys.
Okay, let me make sure I got this right. Your 3 guys coming off the bench are Tari, KPJ, and Londale. Is that right?
Tari, KPJ, and Tate, and Londale. I would say that those are your 9, right?
Okay.
And then the 10th guy, if he does play a 10-man rotation, I think you're probably talking. I would say Amen. I would say Amen because they do need another guard as probably the 9th or 8th guy.
This is where I'm going to maybe go out a little bit differently than I think what a lot of Rockets fans have in their head. And I'm going to try to figure this out just because I believe they want Kevin Porter off the ball. They want to I don't think this is going to be like a 3-guard Van Vliet, Jalen, and then KPJ coming off the bench playing, 25, 30 minutes a game or something like that.
You think he's a wing?
What I think is he plays a 2-3. And this is where I'm going to go differently than I think where a lot of Rockets fans might be thinking at this point. I think KPJ plays the 2-3. He backs up Jalen and Dylan Brooks at the 2-3 for the most part. Definitely the 2. I think Amen Thompson is going to be your primary point guard. They're going to want to have Van Vliet or Amen Thompson in the game at all times. I can't see after what I saw from Amen Thompson that you don't want to at least give him 15 to 20 minutes. You do not want to overplay, I should say, Fred Van Vliet because he's gotten a ton of minutes the last few years. He's a smaller guy. The wear and tear, I think, is not a good idea for him. I don't think they brought Van Vliet to play 36 minutes and wear him out. I think they brought him to be this mentor to Jalen Green and Amen Thompson. So him playing 28 to 30 minutes a game is perfectly okay. And then Amen taking those point guard minutes coming off the bench. And here's where I think a lot of fans, you're in this like old traditional basketball head. We saw Steven Silas. He felt like it was mandatory that this was 1985 and I have to have a real center out on the floor at all times. They are going to move to when Şengün is out of the game. Jabari, I feel like for the most part, because I've heard Udoka say they mention him 4-5, 4-5, either him or Ben Sullivan. One of those 2 guys mentioned Jabari 4-5. if they're thinking 4-5 with Jabari, that means he's going to be playing most of the center position, not Jock Landale. And I believe that Tari Eason is going to be in a 3-man big rotation. So he's going to be the 4 whenever Jabari or Şengün's with them out there. And that's what I believe is going to be the main one, unless there's a particular matchup where Jock Landale makes sense. I think he's there for matchups.
Where does Tate fit into this?
For me, I would say Tate might get some spot minutes here and there, maybe in that 3, 4, 5 role. In that situation, somebody gets in foul trouble, but I don't think that it's necessity that Tate needs to play a few minutes every night. And I think just Tate's lack of shooting on a team that lacks shooting to begin with is real tough to put out there. You're going to have Şengün and Amen Thompson, who aren't going to shoot that well. And Dylan Brooks, for all his faults, if you can just limit him from taking the bad shots, he's not terrible out there. He's not as bad as I think a lot of people might perceive him. It's just the type of shots that he takes. Van Vliet will start, instead of taking these, shots in the first 3 or 4 seconds, these long shots. Or I thought from looking at his shot selection with Toronto, it seemed like he was taking shots that he didn't need to. He's a really good shooter if you have him taking the right shots. And I think Udoka is going to tell him, like, we don't want you taking these type of shots. And that's the way I think it's going to set up. But you still cannot have, Jae'Sean Tate out there with Şengün or with Amen. I just think that's a bad formula right there.
See, I actually think there is an avenue for him to play real minutes, especially if you're talking about Landale or Jabari playing the backup 5. Potentially either of those guys can stretch the floor for you. And then you have Dylan Brooks, who's a good catch and shoot guy. You can keep Van Vliet on the floor for second units, and you can find minutes for Tate over there. And then you can put in KPJ at your 2, and you have a good lineup with shooting, and Tate's your only non-shooter there. You can find lineups for him. And I have a hard time believing, after Ime sees him in training camp, that Tate won't get real minutes this year. Like, I think Ime is going to fall in love with this dude. And I like him, man. Honestly, I like the shooting. Yes, it's not great, but it doesn't bother me. Like I'm not at the point where I'm like cutting him out of my regular season rotation. Like he's still a good enough defender to keep in games where I feel compelled to play him 15 minutes a night. Like, I feel pretty happy with that. And if Houston does not see a pathway for him long term, it benefits them to showcase Tate. So, eventually at the trade deadline, maybe a team like Phoenix decides, hey, we have all these trade exceptions and nobody to spend them on. Maybe you throw in Tate, get a couple second rounders back from Phoenix, because they have like 6 second rounders. And you can fit him into that one of those trade exceptions. So that's like a nice way to kind of like ease him into the season, just like play him 15 minutes a game. And I don't think everybody has to play like 20 minutes. Like I think you look at the backup point guard. I think you and I are kind of in agreement. I think Amen's probably going to get the spot, right? And I think you and I are kind of in agreement that they're going to play KPJ as like a backup 2, right? And at the 3, that's where things get interesting, because really, I think Tari is probably the best option at both 3 and 4, right? But because you have Tate, probably play him at the 3, right? And then at backup center, you can get weird, right? Because you have 3 centers there in Jabari, in Landale, and Green, and you can get weird. And I think that's probably enough to get you through the regular season. And I think there's going to be trades that may open up more minutes for other guys, or more minutes for your top end guys overall. And I think that should be enough to keep the minutes off Tate, to keep the minutes off Van Vliet, as you talked about, because he has played a lot of minutes, and enough to keep the minutes off of Jabari, keep the minutes off your top end guys, and have a pretty healthy rotation. And I think there's going to be shooting in most lineups. I don't think it's going to be that much of a liability.
Can Ime Udoka get Jae'Sean Tate not to foul 5 times in the first 15 or 20? Because I know everybody says this guy's a great defensive player, but great defensive players don't get 5 fouls in 20 minutes every time they step out on the floor. And this has been going on for a long time. He's 20. He's in his late 20s. This isn't a 20-year-old that's doing this stuff.
Well, he's only gonna be playing 15 minutes a game, so who cares, right? Like it's not gonna be as much of an issue if he's a bench player. That's what bench players. Bench players are inherently flawed, right? There is something holding them back from being a starting player. That's why they're a bench player. With Tate, it's the fouls and it's the shooting, and he's still good enough at the one thing to keep him viable and passing. I think he's a pretty good passer actually. He's still viable at those two things to keep him playing. And I think he's a pretty vocal, guy. I think he's going to help the rest of the young guys be in positions defensively. So I think I don't know. I see a real role for Tate. And I again, he is coach's catnip. Like Steven Silas, first year in the NBA, starts him, right? With Harden still on the roster, with John Wall still there, starts him, right? And that was a shock to everybody. Like he's starting a young player right off the bat, and it was because the guy does stuff that coaches really like.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you're worried about him fouling out. It's just, to me, it's bad defense if you're picking up fouls that quickly. And that's my thing with Tate is, when everybody says this guy's a really great defensive player, I think it's a little bit of a try hard guy at times out there, because try hard guys get in foul trouble real quickly because they're not thinking the game correctly. If you're fouling that often, that's an issue. But here's the other thing with Tate, and think about this, Salman, and I'm sure you have. Is he going to be around past February? I still think we are not sure that he's going to be there even when the season starts. He might be as a part of a little connection to some of these trades that are out there, the Dame trade or the Harden trade. The Rockets might get involved somehow, because the Rockets have guys that could kind of fit into that with Londale and Tate. You take a couple of guys like that and maybe you send them out and maybe you get something back as far as like one asset. So you're not, instead of having two like so assets, maybe you have just one much better rotation player, whether it's somebody at the 4 or 5 or whatever. That's what I'm kind of thinking is like they could still, it's not over with, especially it feels like there was always something more in mind. I just have a hard time. Rafael Stone's just like, here, what we're going to do is clear all this out and we're going to give a bunch of money to Jeff Green and Jock Londale and give away second round picks and all our first rounders. And, there isn't something, at least they're thinking that could connect into something else still down the road.
Well, the Rockets love that contract. I love that contract that Tate has. I mean, he gave Houston a pretty sweetheart deal. Maybe the market wasn't as great, and that's probably why he was able to. He didn't get a big money offer in restricted free agency, but I think that's a contract that Houston wants to keep on the books at least until February, so they can see what's out there. I mean, because it really is easy to trade, and it's sizable, so you can really get something of significance back. If you're, I talked about that trade exception thing we talked earlier in the podcast, but you don't have to trade him in a trade exception. You can get something back, maybe an expiring or something, if it's not a real player. But he is I think Tate's the kind of guy that, yeah, he has his faults, right? He's not a perfect player, but he is so smart, and that's why he's a good passer. That's partly why he's a good defender. And I think he's a really good connective piece. And I think a lot of teams are going to be sniffing around to see if he's going to be able to be had for pretty cheap. And that's why Houston has to showcase him. If they do indeed move him, at least early on, he's going to be in the rotation, because you can't move guys who are just not playing unless you're planning on dumping them, right? Like they did with Ty Washington. If they're planning on getting something of value, they're going to have to play him.
Yeah, it's interesting because I just feel like between the Tate contract, the Londale contract, and the Jeff Green contract, you can say, well, hey, these are kind of cool contracts for the Rockets, but probably even better contracts to trade for other teams, because there's outs for those teams. There's easy outs. They're not expensive guys, and they're guys that can play in a potential playoff rotation, maybe be backups or at least be 10th or 11th guys for some of these playoff teams.
I mean, Londale in particular is a walking trade exception. Like he is going to be someone that is in danger of being cut every single year except for this year, right? Because that's the way the Rockets structure his contract. KPJ too. See, like one thing I appreciate that the Rockets have maintained in the transition from the from the prior front office is their creativity with this stuff, right? Their contracts are imminently tradable, imminently flexible, and are easy to package together with other contracts to formulate trade packages. So, yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think those are contracts that the Rockets really like. I mean, there's a reason that he was kept and KJ Martin wasn't, right? Because KJ Martin, let's be clear, was probably the better player, but they traded him because KJ Martin had value on that on an expiring contract, and up for contract next year. And Kevin Porter Jr. was more sizable. Not Kevin Porter Jr. Sorry, excuse me. Jae'Sean Tate was more sizable and more long term, and that's kind of why they chose that. And I think it was probably the right approach.
One of the things that I'm really happy to see that you pretty much agree with me on is the Dillon Brooks contract. I felt like there's just way too much overthinking by a lot of people with the Dillon Brooks contract, the third and fourth year. You've said it. I've said it. When you look 2 years down the road, it's going to be a lot less in terms of the salary cap as the cap goes up, the percentage wise. And, it's not like this guy is. I mean, we keep paying attention to all of his off-court antics, or some of what he says and all of that sort of stuff. He ended the year second team All NBA defense. He's one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA. I mean, I put a message to Sam Vecini, and he said, "Well, some of those numbers are overrated." You guys voted him second team All NBA defense. So I don't know what to tell you. Like, the guys out there that spend time to do this said second team All NBA defense. And if Ime Udoka can't get to this guy in the next year or two about his shot selection, then, he's going to move himself into irrelevancy. And he knows if he wants to be a relevant player in the NBA, his shot selection's got to be better. And Udoka, he convinced a lot of Boston Celtics players, including Marcus Smart, to be a little bit smarter in shot selection. I don't know why people around the NBA can't give Udoka credit, a guy that a year ago was coaching a finals team, to maybe improve Dillon Brooks' shot selection. I know we think Memphis does everything right, but their team was a little bit out of control at times, mostly off the court, but there was an out of control element to that. And Dillon Brooks, I think, is still coachable. That guy spends 4 hours on film on a regular daily basis. He wants to win. He will listen. I think he will listen to coaching.
Yeah, I like Dillon Brooks. Like, I think it's strange that they're like as smart. We've gotten so much smarter as the NBA media, especially from when I was a fan like 15 years ago, right? Like the analysis I was looking for was like crumbs, right? I was looking for anything that was smart, and there's so much now that is smart, and it seems like as we've gotten smarter, there's just a lot more groupthink too, and that's the unfortunate thing, right? Like with Dillon Brooks, after he said what he said about LeBron, which was dumb, but who cares? It's not a big deal. He's trash talking in the middle of a series. It's not like LeBron wasn't gonna try if he didn't say that. Like, no, LeBron didn't turn anything on. LeBron was just LeBron, which is like one of the 3 greatest players of all time. Like, that's what he was doing. He was just being LeBron for the rest of the series, and it felt like Dillon Brooks got blamed for that loss, which was, I mean, he didn't shoot the ball well, right? That was tough, and the shot selection was iffy. But you gotta understand with Brooks. First of all, Houston signed him to a declining contract, right? So it's gonna get better over time. Second of all, the cap is going to go up like 10% over time. So you're talking opposite directions for his contract.
10% a year.
Yeah, like it's going to go up like, the most it can go up, I believe, is 10%. But if it wasn't 10%, you could go up higher. I mean, it may go up higher. They're doing cap smoothing finally for the next few years. And I mean, this is going to take up right now. As of right now, Brooks is going to be like 17, 18% of their salary cap. By the fourth year, you're talking 15%, 14% of the cap. That's nothing. That's nothing. That's like you're talking. That's what role players get paid. Role players get paid less than 20% of the cap, and he's going to be a starter, and he's going to be an awesome defender. And I mean, if you look at what Udoka was able to do with Marcus Smart, Marcus Smart was taking 1.6 pull-up jumpers a game pre-Udoka, right? That's a lot for Marcus Smart. And Boston fans will tell you he took them in sometimes the worst possible situations. So it felt like even more than 1.6 a game. And when Udoka came in, that dropped down to 0.8. He halved his pull-up jumpers per game. And that's Udoka's style. He's a guy who will pull you to the side, tell you what you're great at, tell you what you're not good at. And I think Dillon Brooks probably understands, like, if it wasn't for Houston, I was not going to have much of a market out there. I was looking at $12 million a year, signing somewhere on the mid-level exception. And, you know, this he managed to get what is for him a fair market deal, but he got way above a market deal. And I think he probably understands, like, I can't be like taking 4 pull-up jumpers a game. Like that's not gonna cut it here. We have Jalen Green, you have Amen Thompson, you have Jabari Smith, you have Alperen Sengun. You have guys who are much better shot creators than me. So I have to cool it with that. And in a specialized role, there's no reason this guy can't be an effective player. There's just no reason. Like, and again, the contract, you have to compare it to other wings in the NBA. He's getting paid pretty much aligned with those guys are getting paid.
We forgot to mention, this is the last thing I want to throw out there, Cam Whitmore's minutes. And how does he get minutes with these guys? And one of the things Udoka's talked about, he's going to have a fair fight going into training camp. You said Jae'Sean Tate is going to get minutes. But if it's a fair fight between Jae'Sean Tate and Cam Whitmore, yeah, Cam Whitmore, not as good as passer, not as maybe smart in some ways as Jae'Sean Tate. You know, Cam's got some stuff to learn, but you put Cam Whitmore out there instead of Jae'Sean Tate, and you got a guy that can put the ball in the basket a lot easier than Jae'Sean. Jae'Sean Tate's just not going to give you as much space to work with when he's out on the floor. Jae'Sean Tate's maybe just not the athlete that Cam Whitmore is. Is there a scenario that Cam Whitmore can get minutes?
There is. I would bet against it just because there is a lot weighing against him. Like that is he's playing at a position of strength for the Rockets, right? Like I'm not saying this is going to be a 50-win team next year, but this is going to be a team that's much improved in large part because of their depth, especially at the wing position. And I think he's going to have a tough battle. I mean, it's not just the fact that he has to outplay Jae'Sean. He has to outplay Jae'Sean, and he has to outrank Jae'Sean in the locker room, which is going to be tough. Jae'Sean carries a pretty loud voice in that locker room. He is a leader for that team, and I think, especially when you weigh in when you put into when you weigh his contract, Jae'Sean's contract, and the fact that Houston might want to showcase him a little bit, there might be some front office politicking going on in terms of Jae'Sean probably should play for at least the first half of the season before the trade deadline, so we can get as much value as we can for him, right? If Jae'Sean's gets traded, which I would suspect 2 months in the season, we're going to be talking a lot more about that, about Jae'Sean as a possible trade candidate, just because like after Eric Gordon, he was always the guy to talk about next. But yeah, I mean, there's an avenue for him. If he outplays him to such an extent to where it's undeniable. Like I remember Josh Christopher made himself undeniable his rookie year, right? He forced his way into the rotation, even though it didn't feel like there was any way he would get it, right? But he found a way. By the end of the season, he was playing rotation minutes. So maybe by the end of this season, Cam Whitmore is a rotation player.
One thing us fans always forget, though, there's always injuries. There are always injuries in the NBA.
Yeah.
Guys are getting, days off for managing their whatever. And we saw that a lot last year. I don't know. We don't have the Eric Gordons that's going to have the automatic days off these days with back-to-backs. But I I'm sure Cam Whitmore is going to get his chance at some point, unless Jeff Green's in front of him or something like that.
Hey, listen. If someone like Jabari goes down for an extended stretch, which knock on wood, I'm sure you don't want that. I don't want that. I think there's going to be a pathway for him to get minutes in that kind of a circumstance. I'm just saying in general, if things go as planned, right? Which maybe I shouldn't say something like that. But if things go as planned, I don't see it. But yeah, you're right. You're right. Certainly there stuff happens, and in those circumstances he could play. I'm just generally unbothered by taking a slow approach with both Amen and Cam. Frankly, I think the Rockets have afforded themselves some runway by what they did in free agency, by signing Fred VanVleet, by signing Dylan Brooks. They don't have to rush these guys, right? I think that's kind of the point of making signings like that.
It's nice to actually do what good teams do.
Yeah,
when they bring in rookies.
Yeah. Yeah.
How long have you been doing Red Nation Hoops? We're about to hit 10 years in a couple of months, and I know you're not that far behind me. You've been doing this for a few years now, right?
9 years. 9 years. I think the podcast started in 2015.
Yeah, that's 9 and 10 years these days in podcasting is pretty good.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, listen, I enjoy it. I mostly do it, for the fun. I mean, like to be honest, like it's not something I've ever thought to monetize. Like I've had opportunities. I just don't think it's, worth my time.
Well, great job with all of that stuff. And can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on our show. And we look forward to the Rocket season. And hopefully you and I can catch up again in the next couple months.
Hey, I really appreciate you having me on, and congratulations on upcoming 10 years. I mean, that's again, you said it to me, I'm gonna say it to you. It's a big deal.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.